Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, the college admission process is completely broken. A great article by Jeffrey Selingo of The Atlantic. Our question from a listener, Lisa, what are your thoughts about the recent article in The Atlantic entitled, Why Are Teens So Sad? That's part 2 of 2. Our interview is with Roger Parrott, the president of Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi, on what are the major trends impacting higher education. And our college spotlight is the second part and final part of UIC, the University of Illinois in Chicago.
You sound high energy, man. You must not be coming off the graveyard shift.
I am coming off a graveyard shift, but I'm trying out my new single malt scotch that my wife got me for my birthday.
There you go. I feel like it's working.
There you go.
So plenty of announcements today. First of all, we love all the college spotlights that you send in and you ask us to do. We love it because we want to make sure we're scratching where you're itching. But I'm just going to be honest. We have about 25 requests sitting in the kitty. And you know we tend to do two-parters on these because we want to have a lot of depth. And we don't want to have a 3-hour podcast. And quite honestly, by doing two-parters, it's cut our production time down so significantly. Plus, a lot of times I'm interviewing senior leaders, and they're going to do a spotlight. And I've got a bunch of travel coming up right now where I'm going to be on these campuses, and I'm going to want to do spotlights freshly after I visit the school. So just being honest, if you send a new spotlight in, it's going to be at least a year and a half out before we can get to it. So don't want you to be frustrated, not saying not to send anything in, but just know that right now we're at least 18 months out from any new requests. I just want to be upfront about that. All right. I cannot thank every one of our listeners enough, and I'm going to be really transparent with you guys with some numbers here. First month when we had our podcast, February of 2018, 239 people downloaded the podcast for the month. 239. And last month, we were over 18,000. So that's a credit to you. And the reason why I know that is because there's two ways that podcasts grow. They grow by subscribers. So if you're not subscribed and you like this podcast, please click the subscribe button. That impacts the algorithms. And then they grow by word of mouth and social media. And I can't tell you how many people send emails in and say, I tell all my friends, about your podcast. I mean, just this week I was talking to a mom in the Midwest, and she said, my sister's in Palo Alto, and your podcast is circulating amongst all the parent groups out there. So whoever's spreading the word, I just want to thank you guys so much. Podcasting has really changed a lot. Now it's kind of like billboards, Dave. You can go on and you can see like this song is ranked, whatever. And when we first launched, I was really into the stats. I check it multiple times a day. Then, after a while you tune it out, and I would literally go months and I wouldn't look at it. Well, now there's new stuff, and there's this new sort of ranking service out there that ranks podcasts according to the most listened to podcasts. And our category is education for kids. And I say this with humility and gratitude, but thanks to you guys, for the last several weeks, we've been the number one podcast in the college podcast space in terms of the most listened to podcast under education for kids. We've cracked the top 10 multiple times for all podcasts related to kids. But when it comes to college admissions, we've consistently been one. Sometimes we drop down to two. We're either one or two, but we've been one for several weeks in a row. And so I just want to thank you guys for that. Once again, my view on rankings. That doesn't mean we're the best. If you want podcasts hearing from students, there's better podcasts. If you want shorter podcasts, there's better podcasts. If you want more grad school stuff, there's better podcasts. But it does mean that there's a sizable listenership out there, and it's really because you guys have spread the word, and I'm really thankful.
I was going to give you a great compliment. You guys don't know, but Mark is a huge LA Lakers fan, and I was about to say that we're becoming the LA Lakers of the college podcast until I remembered that the Lakers didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah,
So
I was like, what are you doing over there, man? Why didn't you bring up that I was a Laker fan when LeBron won the championship? Why are you bringing it out this year? Why are you bringing salt on the wound, man? Salt on the wound.
We're the Lakers of the college podcast, but those chuckleheads didn't even make the playoffs. So we're going to give me another week and I'll find another compliment to give you, my brother.
I don't know if I want to take it after this one. One strike and you're out. All right, friends. I mentioned last week, we've been mentioning over the last several weeks, rolling out our new format as my brother from another mother transitions from weekly to monthly starting in June. Last week I said we'd be having really highly experienced people, most cases, who have had substantial experience on both sides of the aisle, admissions and college counseling, doing stints either. Some will do once a month, some will do 4 times a year, just, rounding out our group and working on finalizing it. So what I'm going to do over the next several weeks is mention who some of those people are. And I'm very excited to mention the first person, and her name is Susan Tree. You've probably heard me mention her more than one time on this podcast. I'm going to read to you a little bit about her formal biography, and then I'm going to say a few words about Susan. So Susan's a native New Yorker. She moved to New England after graduating from St. Lawrence University. She spent 12 years at Bates College as an associate dean of admissions, where she earned her MS in education and school counseling from the University of Southern Maine. And then for more than 20 years, she was the director of college counseling at Westtown School. That's why you've heard me mention Susan quite a bit, where she worked together with students from all over the world. Oh, this is weird. I'm in here. And with Mark Stucker, founded the Independent School Multicultural Conference and College Fair. We worked together on that. Susan coached families through the college search and has evaluated applications for a number of selective universities, and most recently in the last few years. She's active in national college admissions profession. She served as a founding board member of the Character Collaborative, the Independent Curriculum Group, and the college access organization Go to College New York City, where Susan and I are both board members. She has served on the counselor advisor committees to the College Board, to the Educational Testing Service, and to the Common Application. She's also volunteered with the National Association for College Admission Counseling on multiple committees related to admission practices and standardized testing. A counselor at heart who loves being in the mix with families, Susan's favorite job is the mom of twins who are recent college grads who also went to school with my youngest daughter, Joy. So that's the foremost part. What I can just tell you is I wouldn't be here today without Susan. She brought me in. I was the associate director of admission at Westtown School, and she allowed me to be an adjunct college counselor on her team, and really let me and trained me. And it's not just me that she's trained. So many people out here owe our start to Susan. We've had Brendan Barnard on the podcast multiple times. We've read multiple articles. Susan trained him. Shareem Herndon-Brown, who's an author, and you'll be hearing from him next week. Susan trained him. In fact, just this week, let me mention another person. Mark Hatch, who's the VP of Enrollment at Colorado College. Susan trained him when he was at Bates and brought him into the profession. Just this week, I was having some email correspondence with a major college publishing company whose name, if I mention, everybody would know. And the person was going back and forth with email, and they said, what is in the water at Westtown School? You've got Brendan Barnard, you've got Shareem Herndon-Brown. And I said, well, it all goes back to Susan Tree. She trained all of it. And then the person cracked a little pun. Oh, it's all the tree. Get it? Tree branches. A little joke there. But you're going to love Susan. She's articulate. She's passionate. She's a person of tremendous integrity. And if the name sounds familiar, I did interview her for 2 hours on the podcast on how to bring yourself to life in your personal statement. So you can go back and listen to that. But you're in for a real treat, and I'm very excited. She's my friend. We talk for hours about this stuff, so we're just going to let you in on the two of us just talking about college admissions. I think you're going to love her. Susan Tree, friends. Okay, I said I had a lot of announcements, but it is time to transition. I also have 2 admissions tips. So now's the time with my students. We're all working on our activities list, the juniors. We've all got assignments to do their activities list. But you know what? I hate that term because when you say activities, it implies it's school-based, or it implies it has to be a group activity. A better term would actually be your commitments list. Does not have to be school-based, nor does it have to be group-based. Let me give you an example. Let's say someone is working on their own at training for a triathlon. That's something that should go in their activities list if it's something they're avidly committed to and they put a lot of time into. I'll tell you about someone else I'm working with right now. This student watches a bunch of movies and then he does movie reviews. It's not a school-based endeavor. It's not even a group-based endeavor, but he puts a lot of time into it. He cares about it. That should be in what's called the activities list. I'm trying to change it to the commitments list. So that's a little tip. Don't think of it only as school-based or only as group-based. If you spend a lot of time and it's important to you, it belongs there. That's tip number 1. I have 2 this week. Second one. Dave, remember our article on calculus?
Yes.
So you remember in that article, I said there's a strong push from a lot of life sciences to say stats actually matters more. So I had a very interesting scenario with a student I'm working with in California. And the student can take calculus, but she doesn't want to. She's like, should I take stats or calc? I want to go into direct admit nursing programs. And I just read a couple articles recently about how these direct admit nursing programs are really starting to prefer stats over calc. So this is my tip, and it relates here. If you have a curriculum question, you can send it in to us so we can get it on the air. But send it directly to your regional admission officer, and this is what I told them to do. So they report it back. And by the way, the mom said, I'm a psychologist, and I took calc, but stats would have helped me so much more than calc. So the family got back to me, and guess what? 3 of her schools said take stats over calc for us. University of Portland, San Diego State, and Belmont University. All direct admit programs, they said stats is either required for us and calculus is not. We'd prefer stats. 3 schools, Gonzaga, Arizona State, Point Loma, they all said take whichever one you'll do best in. Either one is fine. Now, that's just a sample size of 6. It's not a sample size of 600, and this is very school-specific. University of Pennsylvania only has 100 people in their nursing program. They may have a different answer. They may tell you take calculus and stats. All right, so this is school-specific, but that's the tip. If you're not sure of a curriculum question, reach out and ask the school. Friends, it isn't only school-specific, but it's also major-specific. I was specifically referring to certain nursing direct admit programs. Other majors, such as biology, chemistry, biochemistry, computer science, economics, environmental science, not environmental studies, but environmental science, math, neuroscience, physics, and public health, like calculus, and may even require it. The point is, reach out to your regional admission officer about any curriculum question. Finally, I don't want you to think I put everybody's business on the street. I sought the approval from this family I'm referring to as to whether or not I could share this on the podcast, and they gave me the thumbs up. Admissions vernacular. The term is LMO. LMO, like many others. That's not good. That means you're nondescript. You're not standing out. If you get labeled LMO, like many others, nondescript, that's something in the more competitive pools, you're unlikely to emerge as somebody that will get an offer. LMO. Slang for you're just like too many others in the applicant pool. Okay, big number, 75%. What is 75%? It's a new Pew Research study. And for those of you who are our podcast partners, first of all, thank you. You guys are the ones who allow us to pay our staff and stay commercial free. We have over 350 hours. We've never ran a single commercial. We should already have received by now a discussion on this article of a new study by the Pew Research that came out on education. But I was going to share one stat from that Pew Research study. 3/4 or 75% of people say race, ethnicity, gender, and legacy should have no factor whatsoever in admissions. That's the public speaking. That's where the public's at. Only 1 in 4 think race, ethnicity, gender, or legacy should have any role in admissions. And I personally don't agree, but I'm in the minority. Like, look at when I'm assembling a podcast team, I do look at gender. I look at geography. I look at race. I look at ethnicity. I look at age. I look at experiences. I want to have the most diverse team I possibly can because different people have different experiences. They understand things differently based on their experiences. And so I try to assemble the most diverse and talented team, and those things are factors. they don't compromise for excellence. But that's just me. I'm in the 1 and 4. 3/4 of the people disagree with me. All right, my friend, we got a lot to dive into. Let's kick our article off.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Great article. It is by Jeffrey Selingo, and it is that the college admissions process is completely broken. It's his article in The Atlantic. Well, Jeff starts off with the statement that according to the organization that runs the Common App, application volumes to the middle of February of this year increased 10% from the preceding year, which itself was up some 10% from the year before that. In fact, over the past 2 decades, the number of applications submitted to colleges has increased more than 150%, even as the size of the high school graduating classes has remained relatively stable. And he says, while this might seem like good news, it's actually not. Because flooded with applications and crunched for time, quote, admission officers quickly scan the files of most students who have no prayer of getting in and spend just minutes reviewing those they ultimately accept. And he says that much of this dysfunction stems from a misperception about how hard it is to get into college. Now, it is true that a sliver of colleges are hyper-competitive. He mentioned Stanford at 5% admissions, Colby at 10%, Vanderbilt at 12%. But this selectivity is an illusion because the overwhelming majority of colleges admit most students who apply. In fact, 75% of schools that use the Common App accept more than half of their applicants. Yet, he says, students come into the process thinking they don't have a shot of getting in, and nothing could be further from the truth. So, what he says is that a better way exists, and he mentions 3 factors that colleges could use to alleviate the congestion and stress they have created and provide relief to both schools and students in the process, even at the selective schools, by reforming the application system. Well, what are those ways? Number 1, he says colleges can be more straightforward about their selection criteria. And he really focuses on the concept of holistic admissions, where they said we're looking at a lot of factors. But he says the truth is that the majority of schools make the bulk of their decisions by assessing the rigor of an applicant's high school courses and their grades, and in some cases, the ACT and SAT scores. And that for most colleges, amassing impressive lists of extracurricular activities and hiring essay coaches end up being futile in the admission process because they really don't focus on those factors. And he mentioned something very interesting, that last year the Common App experimented with something called the direct admission, which basically says that students proactively admitted their applications based on data supplied by K-12 schools on basic information provided by the students. And about 3,300 students were offered a guaranteed admission to the school in the state if they met their GPA requirement. And they found that it was not only a lot more efficient, but a lot more stress-free. The second recommendation, he says, is that colleges should eliminate binding early decisions. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, Mark, because we've talked about this ad nauseum. But bottom line is, he says that the early decision leaves students with the impression that there's only one right college for them, and for many, early decision has become the new regular decision, and it's fraught with a lot of issues that we've already discussed. And finally, he says selective colleges can ask for far less to determine an applicant's chances. He suggests a system where the application can be staged, where maybe first the transcripts are admitted, then the recommendations at a second stage, and essays at another, allowing the schools to narrow the pool efficiently at each point and ensuring that students don't spend unnecessary time or energy preparing for an application in which they will ultimately be rejected. So I'm going to stop there, Mark, and throw it open to you and ask you what you think about Jeff's analysis of the problems and what do you think about the solutions that he advocates.
Thanks, Dave. Great summary as always. There's a lot I like about this article, and I'll let you know what it is, but there's also a few things I would disagree on. So let's talk about that. So he starts out, he says, over the last 2 decades, the number of applications submitted to colleges increased substantially. It's up 150%. And that's true, 150% in the last 2 years. And school size hasn't increased really since the 70s. Most of these schools are taking the same number of kids they took in the 70s. So you want to know why it's so much harder to get in. Apps keep going up, and the school size doesn't go up. But then he says, flooded with applications and crunched for time, admission officers quickly scan the files of most students who have no prayer of getting in just minutes, reviewing those they ultimately accept. Okay, I don't disagree with for the highly selectives. Many have no prayer of getting in. I'll talk about that in a second. But I don't like the way he said scan the files in just a few minutes, because it implies that this is just a big arbitrary process and there's not due diligence being given to a file. Yes, I've mentioned this to you before. Even when I went through what I think would surprise you if you were an admission officer, one of the things I said, you'd be surprised how fast schools read files. You would be, like people spend all this time on these essays and then you just see, man, they whip through them. But what he doesn't bring out there is they get incredibly good and efficient at speed reading and at being able to process things in a way that you or I, who hadn't read it that kind of rapidity, wouldn't be able to do. And so I just think that on that point, yeah, they're read fast, but that does not mean it's completely arbitrary. And, your skills, like think about Dave, anytime you look at you, what is there? I'm sure there's some procedure that you've done more than 1,000 times, probably as a doctor.
Yeah.
Can you think of one? I can't give you an example, but I know you probably could.
Well, there is a joke that ER docs can generally tell if a patient is sick by whether they're sitting up or lying down when the ambulance gurney rolls them into the emergency room. That's an awfully good clue,
Yeah. So I think that's just another point that has to be brought in there to balance things out. So I wanted to just mention that. So when he's talking about the selectivity illusion, and he refers to it, selectivity as an illusion, stressing students out and leading them to needlessly apply to multiple colleges when they can only enroll one. Meanwhile, 75% of schools use the Common App. So definitely true, but here's what I also think needs to be said. The media plays a huge role in the stress out game.
Yes.
Because of their obsession with this group of schools. I was listening to Ron Lieber, who we've talked about a few times. I critiqued his article a few weeks ago, and we've also promoted his book that he's got out recently. And I've also promoted the role he's playing in challenging colleges to be fully disclose the cost of college before they ask people to commit. I listened to an interview with him recently, and he was being challenged. He said, "Why do you talk about Harvard so much? Aren't you contributing to?" He writes for the New York Times. Aren't you contributing to the frenzy around college admissions? And I appreciated the honesty of his answer. I'll basically summarize his answer. He basically said this: well, our listenership, the New York Times, yeah, maybe less than 1% will get in Harvard, but a much higher percentage think they're going to get in, and probably at least 30% are Harvard curious. So I know what's going to drive clicks. I know if I write on that, it's going to get viewership. A recent article that just came out, these articles come out every single year in the Wall Street Journal. Oh my goodness, hardest year ever to get into college. Profiled a student in Duncanville, Texas, with incredible stats who got shut out at all these places. And those are intentionally done by the media. You know what? I went on and did a little more digging, Dave. Within 24 hours, that article had not 1,000 views, 1,000 comments. 1,000 comments. So you can't put it all on the schools for the stress out. The media does it. And then, David, also goes back to what Idan Shahar said. It's not about test scores. It's about scarcity.
Yes.
It's not just the public. The public is obsessed with status. It is. It's why a lot of people go to be doctors when maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe they won't like it. It's why people live in certain zip codes that maybe they can't afford to live in. It is why people drive cars they can't afford. It's why a lot of decisions are made. So I think there's a couple other factors here that warrant some, part of the blame. So I wanted to mention that. You know what? It reminds me, Dave, of I don't know if you remember this, but you and I, our whole families went to Philadelphia as for a family trip. And this was like when we were in high school. It was a long time ago. And we went to Overbrook High School where Wilt Chamberlain played, and we saw a basketball game. Went to triple overtime.
That's right. I remember that. Yes.
Remember that game?
I sure do.
Dave and I are going way back. This is like 1980.
That's
right. How long ago this is.
That's right.
But one thing that stuck with me, and here it is like 42 years later, and I still remember it. When the programs were announced for the players on the team, and in the programs it said, what do you want to do? Half of the people said they want to play in the NBA. And that's kind of how it is with this. Like, so much of the population is obsessed and fixated on, I can go to one of these schools, or maybe I can, that they write on it, and it drives the frenzy up. And so I just feel that needs to be brought out as well. It's not just the college's low selectivity rate. It's the public's fascination with prestige, and it's the role the media does to stoke it by constantly writing articles on hardest year ever to get in. I guarantee you next year this time you'll find an article. They'll say the same thing. Hardest year ever to get in. Look at these acceptance rates. Look at this incredible person. It's a guaranteed, it's clickbait, and it works every time. So I just wanted to mention that. Now, there's something he said in this article that I was just like, I wanted to do a backflip, but I was afraid I'd break something. I was so happy he emphasized it. So this is what he says. Holistic admissions may sound great, but many offices at less selective schools make the bulk of their decisions by assessing the rigor of an applicant's high school courses and grades. In other words, and then he says, amassing impressive lists of extracurricular activities, hiring essay coaches, end up being futile in the admission process at colleges where the high school transcript drives the decision. Lengthy application forms are also a particular unfair burden to students. Now, this is why I like this, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before. There is a fallacy about how holistic admissions works. Karen Kristoff, who you'll hear in about a month, admissions dean at Colorado College, we talked about this. I think it was off air, but we talked about how admission officers need to do a better job of explaining holistic admissions. The public tends to think holistic admissions means everything counts equally. So the public tends to think, well, my grades aren't that great, but boy, wait till people see my recs. Wait till people see how I can write my butt off. Wait till they see my essays. I know, because this is what I hear from people. So, and what he's saying, and this is true, is if you don't pass the transcript test, you're done. You're cooked.
You have a great analogy that it's like airport screening. Why don't you share that, Dave? Admissions basically means that they look at other factors, but you still have to get through the security before they actually do the pat down. So yeah. So the example I like to use is in order to get on an airplane, there's 2 steps, right? You got to get through security, but that doesn't mean you're on the flight. You might go to the food court and miss your flight. They might overbook. You might fall asleep, which I've done before. Fall asleep there, miss my flight. But you got to get through security or you're toast. And what is security? It is a transcript review. It is grades. It is grade trends. It is rigor and test scores if you submit them or if they're required. All that stuff is in there. And I would say if there's recommendations, they have to at least say, you're not going to be the kid who's going to burn the place up. They got to at least be at a certain level. If you don't have that, none of the other stuff is going to matter. And the public doesn't understand that. And that's part of what leads to this widespread frenzy. So I thought it was really good that he drew attention to that. So let's transition now to talk about his 3 solutions to make it better. Because he has these 3 solutions that he feels would make things better. And I kind of want to comment on each of them. So one of his solutions is getting rid of early decision. And we've talked about this, like Dave said, a lot. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, right? Because it's biased toward people that do not need to compare financial aid offers. And so there's a bias there.
And I would vote for getting rid of early decision. I think you guys know that because I do believe you're getting federal aid and there's this tremendous class bias in there. However, I am not under any illusion that would drastically change things, because as I've said, even as recently as a month ago, people would just create their own early decisions. They just would. I mean, they would say, look, I'm committing, and they could get signatures. From a school standpoint, it's actually, if you really know that somebody's coming, that's going to give you the bump, not necessarily the formal admission process. And I've also got to thinking, Dave, I said in that podcast, early decision may be a thing of the past in the next 5 years. I'm starting to wonder because here's the problem. I cannot see schools getting rid of early decision for athletes. There's just no way. Coaches would go crazy. They rely on people committing. So unless there's a carve out for athletes, I doubt that will happen. And even that I would be an advocate for getting rid of early decision, I still think it's important that you hear the other argument. And the other argument is that you can't do admissions without some ability to predict your class. The public tends to think that the job of an admission officer is to figure out who the best students are and let the best students know that you met a certain mythical admission standard and then you get admitted. And if you're not one of the best, then you either get, deferred, denied, waitlisted, right? But that's not the goal. The goal is matriculation. Your goal is enrollment. And you have so many stakeholders that you have to please. People, I don't think, have any idea how hard the job is and how many stakeholders, how many people are watching you. The faculty is looking at you. The alumni is looking at you. The president, the provost, athletics. And it's not just athletics. Every single coach down to every single position. Development's looking at you. The arts want students. International, they're watching. Geodiversity, how many people are you taking from all these different states? Okay. Program diversity, how many people in particular majors and interests, and some schools have to admit that way. And then there's racial and ethnic diversity, not just in general, but by race and ethnic group. People are watching those numbers. Why did they go down so much this year? What's wrong with you? Is your commitment not there anymore? They're looking at gender diversity. All of these things, it's just incredibly hard to bring together a good mix and then not to over-enroll or under-enroll without having some assurances about who's coming. So I just think that it's easy to say early decision favors the wealthy. It shouldn't be there. But understand, all that's going to happen if it were to be eliminated. One, you'd have these pseudo early decision campaigns that would be set up by savvy consultants that would say, go ahead and commit, get a signature, and the school will know you're coming. And they'll because the schools rely so heavily on this that they will die on this hill. And so just like if they overturn affirmative action, schools are absolutely committed to the fact that a racial and ethnically diverse educational environment is the best learning environment. They're going to find ways to do an end run if they do that, right? Maybe get rid of test scores or whatever, target zip codes. Same thing for this. You get rid of ED and schools will find ways to secure tacit commitments and they'll prioritize people that make the tacit commitment, even if it's not the formal ED process, because they just, you have to look at it from the school's perspective. I mean, if students are out here applying to 25 schools, it can't be a complete total crapshoot who's coming in. There have to be some assurances. Dave, sounds like you want to say something.
There's a quote I left out, but it actually supports your point. And they basically said, quote, let's not kid ourselves about the level of precision. In reality, the schools are not choosing a class as much as they are sending out invitations to join a class. Not every student will RSVP yes. At Northwestern, just 60% do so, meaning 4 out of every 10 accepted students say no thanks. At Wesleyan, a mere 35% take the college up on their offer. So once again, even at elite colleges, when it comes down to actually the admissions process and crafting class, the shoe is very much still on the power is still on the students, and most schools are scrambling, knowing they're only going to have about a 50% yield rate at best.
Yeah, and you know what? That 60% at Northwestern is skewed because they're taking half their class ED.
That's right.
So if you actually take a look at the people that apply RD, their numbers look closer to Wesleyan's numbers, closer to 1 in 3 than 60%, right? Even at very prestigious schools. Now, he breaks up a good point here. He talks about the growth of ED. He said Boston University took half its class ED recently. A decade ago, it took 13% ED. So ED has surged. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is, and Chris Gruber's talked about this before, we just had on the podcast from Davidson. After the great financial crisis happened, 2007 to 2009, schools didn't know who was going to apply. They didn't know what was going on. So they took a higher percentage of their kids' ED just because of uncertainty. The article mentioned Barnard taking 62% ED. Well, Barnard's, had a lot of uncertainty on that campus this year. And so they weren't sure how things were going to happen in the regular admissions round. So that is one of the reasons. Now, is it the only reason? No. Does it drive down your acceptance rate? Yes. Is that part of how schools build their brand? Yes. But it is part of their hedge against uncertainty. And I'll tell you, the more kids apply to more and more and more schools, the more early decision becomes more valuable to schools. Because they just don't want to play that game of, am I one of the 22 schools that you're going to pick at the end?
And we said it before, but the statistics are, Mark, that 20, 30 years ago, people were applying to 2 or 3 schools. I think when we were applying, it was 1, 2, 3 or school.
Yeah,
3 schools.
Definitely.
5 years ago, we were shocked when people were saying it was up to 10 or 12. Now, according to the latest statistics, because of the ease of the Common App application process, kids are applying to as many as 25 schools. They throw all those other schools in there because the process means that they can. And it's gumming up the system is essentially what it's doing.
Yeah, and it's not like large numbers are applying to that many, but enough so that it definitely creates a logjam, and the numbers are up precipitously. Even that apply to 10, it's up, or more. It's up substantially, and it continues to grow. And a good point in the article, it says this: the University of California has more than 210,000 applications on their 9 campuses this year. Guess what? They don't have ED. But I hear as much frenzy from my California families at getting into the UCs as I do anywhere. I mean, I was just talking to a family this week, and they were saying, boy, the PTA meeting was intense about why can't we get into our own state schools that we're paying all these taxes for. So they don't have ED. So I don't want people to think getting rid of ED is some panacea. As long as you have that supply-demand, ratio, and so there's more demand than there are spots, you're going to have a frenzy. So I wanted to mention that. Now let's move on to a couple other points he makes. So his second point is really fascinating to me. And what he's advocating for is direct admission. And the way direct admission would work is schools could just automatically admit you with less information. And believe it or not, this is not something I don't think would ever happen whole scale, but I'm seeing actually aspects of this in areas. So, for example, College Greenlight, they came on our podcast, one of my first interviews. They've rolled out a new program in Chicago, and they've got a consortium of schools. And basically people are putting all their data in one portal, and schools are just making offers right off of that. And that actually can work for less selective schools. So this is something more highly selective schools would not want to do because they're going to want to see all the essays. They may want an interview. They're going to want recs. There's a lot of other things they'd want. But this is something that is starting to grow a little bit because Greenlight's now rolling this out to 10 different cities across the country. I'm involved in helping them bring it to Atlanta. So I'm very involved in that process. But it was extremely successful in Chicago. And so, listen, independent schools can do whatever they want. You're never going to get everybody to go along with all of this. But is this an idea that could help help the frenzy a little bit with some less selective schools? Yeah, it is. Do you get how this works, Dave?
Yes, basically, the students submit data points, SAT scores, grades, and so forth to a central clearinghouse or website, and schools take a look at the profiles and say, we'll take you if you want to come.
Exactly. And for less selective schools that are mostly just admitting by grades and scores, they could actually do that. So that is an idea that I feel would help. It's always hard to get masses of schools to do something all together when they're independent. With all, they just are. These are independent structures with independent reporting systems. But I do think at the margins it's a good idea. And I think it's good to give it elevation because I like what I'm seeing. Chicago is incredibly successful, the pilot, and it's moving out to other areas. Now, let me talk about his final point, which it's another one of these things that would be difficult to pull off whole scale, but I think it's a good idea that it's good sometimes to give oxygen to good ideas because you never know where they grow and end up going, right? So what his idea is here is basically the application could be submitted in stages rather than make people do all this work at once, and that adds to a lot of the stress, only to turn around and get denied because you were non-competitive to begin with. What if you just sent let's say a transcript was due in September, and then if you cleared it through that, if you cleared that hurdle, then you would turn around and submit other things. There'd be some logistical issues that would make it difficult, and schools don't change easily. It'd be hard for schools to embrace this level of change. But believe it or not, this could actually work. And here's why I know it could work. I'll give you 2 examples. The athletic pre-read process. Like, this is basically what happens, right? Like, you submit a transcript, some testing, and a little bit of other information, and then the athletic liaison talks with the admissions liaison, and you either get a thumbs up or thumbs down that it's worth it for you to go ahead and submit. Or in some schools, some schools give you a percentage chance. Like, you have a 90% chance. Everybody's a little different. But they can tell just off of a transcript review and looking at some testing, grade trends, courses, maybe some other thing in there, like sometimes maybe a counselor signs off or it gives approval. There's other, everybody's got a little different system. They know from there whether you're competitive or not. I'll give you another example. A lot of wealthier schools that are trying to attract different kinds of kids have fly-in programs, multicultural fly-in programs to fly in underrepresented students of color. Some schools fly in under-resourced kids or rural kids or women in unrepresented fields. And you know what they do for those programs, Dave? They ask for a transcript, they ask for test scores, and they can look at a transcript and they can look at the grade trends and they can look at the courses taken and they look at test scores. And some of them ask you for like a 200-word essay, or some of them ask you for like a counselor to sign off that you approve of the kid. And from that, they make a decision to invest in you and fly you in. And the acceptance rates are very high for those programs. So the point is that actually could work. It could reduce the work substantially. If you didn't clear the transcript review, it would knock so many non-competitive applicants out, and then you could submit other pieces later. The problem is it would be very, very cumbersome. It would be really hard to get everybody on board. But, one of the things I like that Becky Sabke says in her book, she talks about why, as a Dartmouth admission officer, why am I going to the same schools year after year after year that are always going to give me applications? Why don't I go somewhere else when I'm recruiting? And then she basically says, you know what? It probably will never change, but a girl can dream. And that's kind of how I think this is. I don't see something like this probably ever being implemented wholesale, but it starts with a good idea, and you never know where that seed germinates. I generally don't like to spend too much time talking about things that are pie in the sky that will never happen, but I think some of these ideas, they deserve a little bit of oxygen. Any final thoughts, Dave?
No, I think you're right. Bottom line is this is a problem that's not going to go away. As we're in a status conscious society, and the problem is that education is being seen as a status symbol, not as a means to get kids to an end. And the good news, it's transitory. The bottom line is kids get over it. Parents get over it. They have this period in the 12th grade where it matters a lot. And then a year later, people are shocked when they look back at how irrelevant that decision process was. And people look back and say, I can't believe we actually cared that much about this process.
I would say some people do. I have people that come back to me and want to transfer because they never got into a prestigious school enough, and they want to just change schools. But certainly that applies to some people.
Well, it look, true to my home. I was looking on YouTube, and Hyundai came out with its new car. It's the Ioniq 5.
Here we go. Are we gonna get Tesla into here or not?
Yes, and
of course.
Most of the
so
reviews
predictable.
are saying that this is a great car. It's like $20,000 less than the Tesla Model 5. It drives better. It doesn't have quite the acceleration, but it's got a better panel and so forth. And it's the value car, But people still want the Tesla because it's a Tesla. But I'm here
I know
to
which one
tell
Dr.
you,
Lincoln Penny would go for.
I'm going for the Ionic 5.
I was starting to think you were losing your fastball, man. You were like Joe Biden, man. Just a glimpse of what you used to be, but you hadn't brought Tesla up in 10 weeks.
No, but I mean, most colleges are like the Hyundai Ioniq 5. They are great cars. They're going to get you where you want to go. In many cases, they'll get you there with better features, better things just for you. But I mean, if you want to fixate on the Tesla, spend $20,000 more, or basically get obsessed at the fact that they ran out of the dealership and you can't have one, well, ultimately that's your loss, because the people who are getting ahead are passing you. They're doing just fine in their Hyundai.
All right, well, we're going to put a bow and wrap it up there. But, I think I might have been maybe a little critical. There's some good points in this article. But I'm always going to tell you what I like and don't like about an article. Like, I'm always going to come at it from both sides. There's some stuff that I loved and some stuff that I thought, and in fairness, I think in Selingo's book, he developed some of these points a little more. It's hard when you're limited in your word count, to fully develop a lot of your points. But definitely a thought-provoking article worth reading. Friends, we've recommended it many times before, but if you haven't picked up Jeffrey Selingo's book, Who Gets In and Why, it is absolutely worth reading. Personally, I've read the book and I've listened to it as an audiobook. Both times I got a lot of information out of it. Selingo explains what he learned by sitting in the admission process for a year at Emory, Davidson, and the University of Washington, 3 different schools in different parts of the country. And after I interviewed Will Segura from Emory, I asked him, what do you think about Selingo's book? Did he get Emory right? And he's like, he absolutely nailed it. And after I interviewed Chris Gruber from Davidson, I asked him the same question. Did Selingo accurately describe your process? And he said the same thing. Jeffrey Selingo was spot on. So it's worth picking up if you haven't already purchased it.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, it is time for part 2 of my question to Lisa about what she thinks about the Atlantic article, Why Are Kids or Teens So Sad? We talked about the first 2 reasons last week, and now we will talk about the final 2 reasons in this segment. That's a good segue into the third point, which says the world is stressful, and there is more news about the world stressors basically bombarding kids at all times. So what are your thoughts on this one, Lisa?
Well, I think this one is a huge, so you have when I talk about the perfect storm, right? So you've already got the social media use that is already increasing, that is going to become the replacement for social interaction during the pandemic. You take away the ability to coalesce as a group of teens and get that social support. And then you lay on the stress, right? COVID is scary. I mean, those first months, we did not know what was going to happen,
Sure.
and you have to remember that over 1 million people in this country have died of COVID, and they have families, and some of them are teenagers. And their parents are stressed out, they're stressed out. And then, it just keeps going, if you look at the news on any given day, it's horrible. It's just terrible. And kids are aware of this. And, I think that they don't know how to deal with it. We've taken all their resources away to deal with it. And then we laid on more stress. What did we think was going to happen? Right. I mean, people are going to break. It's really sad.
And I mean, the article points to a lot of things, like it says concerns about gun violence, climate change, political environment, pile-on effect, and then it's, pandemic, and then Russia goes to war. And there's just a lot of things Dave has shared, and I know he won't mind me saying this, and I'll talk to him and get permission before I air it. If not, I'll edit it out, but I know he won't. Lauren, of course, she's from Chicago. And actually, David and Frida don't live that far from where Obama's house is in Chicago. So they grew up with Obama, right? Like first black president, look at all this progress with racial progress. And then all of a sudden you got Charlottesville, people marching, Jews will not replace us. And this huge backlash. That was incredibly psychologically traumatic for Lauren.
Oh, well, I can't imagine it wouldn't be.
Yeah. So like I'm pointing that out just because like there's a lot of stresses like that, one of the things that's been talked about, kids grow up with literally the fear of, is there going to be a mass shooting?
Yeah. And that's been like just part of their life. They're doing
part of their life
drills. Like Thomas and Sonia have never known school without those drills. Never.
Well, it's really bad for my brother Norm. He lives in a really good school district in Colorado, but they've had all of those things. Like, all the things that Colorado's had. It's been bad. And in one case, literally, like, it was just like my niece had to like flee into the library because the shooting was happening like right there.
That's so sad.
Yeah. And so she was running track, and like when the gun would go off, it just triggered all kinds of things because of that. So it's got all these triggers, and that was like multiple years.
Yeah, it's post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, that's what we call it in my field. And like there's a whole generation of kids who have it. Yeah.
And I bring that up just because, like, look at all of the different things kids have dealt with, right? There's all the George Floyd stuff and police brutality, and there's just so many different things. Another one is the global financial crisis, where they may have seen their parents lose their job or their life savings that have hit them, and then it's true. And then one of the things that the article talks about here is that the news knows that it leads with negativity.
Right.
It says right here, an unfortunate but accurate understanding is that negativity generally gets more attention.
It's a business, right? You got to get your clicks, your views.
If it bleeds, it leads. If it bleeds, it leads, is what they say, right? So I know a lot of times I have to turn that stuff off because, I'm already like super sensitive to crime. Like I just don't like to see shooting. I've tried to follow the Ukraine stuff, but I don't want to keep seeing all this death all the time.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just depressing.
Well, two thoughts that I have. One is a client this week told me that her daughter, who's a teenager, told her that she'd been thinking about it and she hoped if there was nuclear war that she'd be in the epicenter of the explosion because she just wanted to be vaporized, and she wasn't that worried about it because there's climate change and then all the microplastics in our body. She said, we're done. We're toast. We're all going to die. It's just a matter of we're going to die this week or in like 5 years. And that's what the kid said to her. And I mean, I am like very sad that she feels that way. I hope she's wrong about that microplastics thing, but it's kind of easy to understand how she got that way, and that is the kind of the logical conclusion when you see this stuff. You're like, oh, my future is not secure. And I don't think you or I felt that way. I think we thought, I had this idea, it was crazy. Everything was just going to get better. It was just going to continually improve. It was never going to not get better and in fact get worse. I guess I was wrong about that one. I also really wanted to mention that this article says that like 75% of LGBTQ kids are experiencing, emotional distress. And I can't imagine this was done before, like, let's say, what is going on in Florida right now with the Don't Say Gay bill and now the prosecution of Disney World. And my heart goes out to these kids because when they hear people talk about them, like they're the kind of thing that you would never want your kid to end up as, and that must be prevented that your kid would end up. That's so heartbreaking.
Well, anything that reinforces otherness in a negative way is just very, very, very hard.
Right. But I mean, these people are straight up like, it's not even just like implicit, like discrimination. I mean, they are like condemning these children. Condemning them, and it's awful. No. I mean, here's a quote from the article. We cannot rule out the possibility that teens are sad about the world, not only because the world contains sadness, but also because young people have 24/7 access to sites that are constantly telling them that they should be depressed about it. So let's move on to number 4, modern parenting strategies. What do you want to say about this one, Lisa? Oh, boy. Yeah. I think this article makes the point that like we have moved from, especially in like upper middle class, higher income parents, from like a more laissez-faire parenting style that I say I was raised in, where I don't really ever remember anyone asking me how I felt about anything. And I was just told to do stuff and either I did it or I got in trouble. I mean, but now it's like parents are investing in their kids. and their egos are, because they feel like they have to get little Johnny into like, travel team soccer, and he's got to be in the gifted class on the weekend. And, the kid has to make this grade and play at this sport and, be friends with these people, because parents feel that they have to invest in that so that their offspring will be successful. And when you start doing that, and they've called it here the rugrat race, which I thought was a great way of describing it. It's bad for everyone. It's bad for parents, right? They're anxious. They're worried. They feel like if their kid little Johnny doesn't get into Harvard after all that stuff, that they have failed. Their life had no meaning. And the pressure that puts on kids to perform and to try to please their parents is, I think, just like unbearable most of the time. And it's just really sad.
It's so true. And from the time, you guys know that Joy, my daughter, played high-level travel basketball. From the time she was in 7th grade, the mindset of those travel teams were, you need to do this 12 months a year.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't just like go play it and do your little thing for 2 months. It's like this needs to be 12 months of the year, total dedication. And so it's overwhelming. And so, as it says, anxious parents in seeking to insulate their children from risk and danger are unintentionally transferring their anxiety to their kids.
Right. Yeah. No, and it's really hard on kids, I think, because it's not only is their life a success or failure, but did I make my parents upset by failing? Like if they're disappointed in me, like that's going to be devastating to my parents, and I guess I could say one of the advantages of laissez-faire parenting style is that you're not the center of anybody's world. So, but if you screw up, it's kind of your problem. You're not worried about the impact, the emotional impact and ruining your parents' lives because you got waitlisted at Dartmouth. And so I think that's really hard. And then that gets to the second point that they noticed, researchers have noticed an increase in what they call an accommodative parenting style. And so parents, they say, will tend to make an accommodation, and they use the example of a girl who's afraid of dogs. And the parents then would say, well, I'm going to keep you away from every friend's house that has a dog, and you just won't ever have to see dogs, and it'll be fine. And although that's protecting your child from an initial emotional, distressing experience, it's actually teaching them that avoidance is the way to deal with anxiety, right? And we all know with anxiety, it generalizes. So you start avoiding dogs, and you don't like cats, and you don't like elephants, you can't go to the zoo, and it just becomes this whole thing, rather than if you say I'm sorry you don't like dogs, but grandma has a dog, so you're going to have to deal with it. That might seem less sensitive in the moment, but it actually, if you can do it in a supportive way, teaches a child to handle stress, teaches the child to handle adversity, and teaches the child that they can survive things, they can cope with things, they have grit, they have resilience. And so maybe that if kids haven't had that kind of, more because I always say and maybe this article actually made me feel better. I'm a therapist, but I'm the least empathic parent around, I'm just don't tell me about your feelings. I didn't ask you if you like to do it. I told you to do it. And my daughter would be I'm scared of heights. I'm no, you're not. Get up there. But now she's not scared of heights anymore. But I always felt gosh, I'm just so mean compared to the other parents. But maybe I was just onto something and I didn't know.
Maybe.
But it gives, if you cannot let kids, just avoid things that are stressful, then it teaches them how to deal with the world. And if you have kids who don't know how to deal with the world, and then you throw all this stress on them, well, I think they're going to get anxious and depressed, right? I mean, that's the only response they've got left.
All right, Lisa. So what should our takeaways be? What are some positive, productive things that we can share with parents so that they can hopefully shelter their kids from some of these pitfalls?
Well, I think that parents we can't control what happens in the world so much, right? That's unfortunately out of our control. But the things we can control is what kinds of attitudes towards emotions and feelings and situations that we give to our kids. And I think one thing is to recognize, really step back and think, what are my actions, either explicitly or implicitly, teaching my child about how I feel about them and what my expectations are? What impact is that can have? And if we really start to think about that, Like if you are kind of disappointed that your kid didn't get into a top 30 school. And I mean, we all know the rankings are meaningless, but let's just say that's your value set. Your kid is going to feel that. They're going to know that. And like, what does that tell them? So as parents, I think we have to change the way we approach how we look at college admissions, how we look at achievement. And I think we have to prioritize kids being happy, kids having a lot of different experiences so that they can figure out what they like and they don't like. And, giving them room to just have fun with their friends. Like that's really important to kids to have fun with their friends. They need it to develop.
No, those are all fantastic points. Need to have fun with their friends, need it's part of their development. And I want to go back to something you said before that. Sometimes when I talk about the point you made, like it's so important for kids to feel like their parents are proud of them. And it's in this whole college admission process. Sometimes the way parents interpret that as, I need to be really careful what I say. But the problem is kids are incredibly perceptive about how you really think.
Yeah, they know what
if you think a certain way, they will know it. So what I really want to challenge parents is to think differently.
Absolutely. It's a paradigm shift.
Yes.
It's a worldview shift where you stop looking at status and you stop looking at everybody else and you think, what is it that's going to help this person become like the absolute best, happiest, most productive person they can be given the strengths that they individually have. Right. Like I'm not expecting Thomas to start on any kind of basketball team. And I'm okay with that. And he's okay with that, too. Like it's just that's not his thing. So it's OK. There's other things you can do. And just to try to like get your own narcissism and your own ego needs out of the picture and think, what is it that this person needs? Because I ultimately believe that is our job as parents. And then the other thing I think you need to do, people, is vote for politicians who support increasing access to healthcare and mental health care, because that's a big deal. I went to a continuing education with the North Carolina Psychological Association a couple of weeks ago, and it was led by a guy. When he was hired to do this presentation, it was about how are kids doing in college with COVID and mental health. He used to be in the college counseling center at Duke, and then he quit before he gave this presentation because he couldn't take it there anymore, because he was constantly there was so much pressure for people to get treatment. There were no therapists there, not nearly enough. There wasn't anyone to refer to in the community. Everyone was yelling at him. And he just said, I think I can do better just taking these, just seeing kids in private practice in the community. And my life has been so much simpler. And this was a man who'd spent his whole professional career in higher education counseling, and he just couldn't take it anymore. And that seemed to me like a disturbing sign as well. So really mental health is important. It's important for our country. I always say that, if you fix the present with a child, you fix the future. But if you do not, then you doom the future. And what kids need is they need mental health treatment, and they need more access to it. And they need insurance, and they need, training programs that are churning good people out so that they're there to see them, and they need someone to pay those people. So that's my plug for that.
No, thanks for that. Cause I don't remember us ever having a plug like that in 5 years on the podcast. So it's very much appropriate and timely. I want to go back to these 10 weeks in a row when I recommended books related to mental health because I was so concerned. And it was episodes like basically 74 through about 84. And you can get all of this if you just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, click the resources tab, hit books, and then scroll down like episode 74 to 85 in that range. You'll see what I feel are some of the absolute best books out there, because I really do believe knowledge is power. And so I'm just going to review some of these books that we covered at that time, and encourage if one of them jumps out at you. All of them are great. This is a book right now that I'm reading again. It's called How to Raise an Adult, Break Free from the Overparenting Trap, and Prepare Your Child for Success by Julia Lithcom-Hames. And she is a Stanford dean, and she writes about how she noticed a difference a certain time when parents just started over-parenting and coming in and starting to control their kids' lives while they were at college, and how it crippled them. So that talks about the danger of owning parents, like the accommodation of stuff that we talked about in point 4. And then this is a really good book. In fact, in the article, it quotes Dr. Lisa D'Amour. It quotes her. And so she has a fantastic book called Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. And so that's a really good book that helps understand the anxiety and stress that teenage girls experience. Another really good book is called The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. It's about raising self-reliant children by Dr. Wendy Mogul. And this is a great book that shows how your disappointments and failures can help you to grow. Another great book we talked about is called The Price of Privilege, How Parental Pressure and Material Advantage are Creating a Generation of Disconnected and Unhappy Kids. So that's by Dr. Madeline Levine, a good book that explains why kids born into affluence are often so unhappy. Then another book we talked about is called The Gift of Failure, How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go So Their Children Can Succeed. That's by Jessica LaHaye. Another good book we recommend is called The Stressed Years of Their Lives, Helping Your Child Survive and Thrive During Their College Years by Dr. Janet Hibbs and Dr. Antonio Rostain. And this was a parent who had a kid at an Ivy League school and basically just fried and burned and dropped out and had all kind of mental issues herself. And she was a psychologist and she wrote about it. And then a couple more, because I think this is important. So I don't want to overlook one. Enough as She Is by Rachel Simmons. That really deals with all the pressures coming at young ladies. It's too much. They have to do all the things men are supposed to do, and they're supposed to be feminine and sexy and smart and all these different things, and it's just blowing all their circuits and how we're contributing to it. So the subtitle for that is How to Help Girls Move Beyond Impossible Standards of Success to Live Healthy, Happy, and Fulfilling Lives. So this book so profoundly impacted my life that I bought the book for both my daughters and all my nieces so they could read it. Once again, all those books, there's a hyperlink that takes you right to Amazon. You can get them. Knowledge is power. And I just want to encourage people because something has to stop. One of my favorite sayings is if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And what we're getting right now is not working. So we need to have a change of course.
No. And I think a lot of the books, they focus on people who are in some ways like in a social group that tends to be, discriminated against or marginalized. And I think you can just look at social groups on the graph in this article of kids, and like the more sort of discriminated and marginalized they already were, the worse this is. And I really think we need to be attentive to that as parents and as a society.
Yeah, thank you for this, Lisa, and keep sending me these great articles and speaking up.
I will keep procrastinating, so don't worry.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, you heard the first part of my interview with Roger Parrott. If you heard last week's interview, it's our first college president we've interviewed. He continues to talk about macro things that are shaping and influencing higher ed, things that keep presidents up at night. Listen and enjoy.
And I think probably the last one I'd mention for what keeps presidents up at night is probably mounting infrastructure challenges. They're not fixing their roofs. They're not fixing their mold problems. I saw a school the other day. Students were protesting, took over the president's office because of mold. It was a name brand school. It wasn't a little school. They're not taking care of those kinds of things. I think one of the things I'm most proud of at Belhaven, and it doesn't show, is we have zero infrastructure that hasn't been attended to. And my board's real happy with it. Nobody else sees it because you don't see what's buried in the ground. But I think a lot of these schools have borrowed a lot of money, and they're going to hit a point of crashing because the infrastructure has crumbled. They can't keep up with it. And an easy way, especially to evaluate a small school, it's real easy to evaluate a small school where they are financially. Go on GuideStar.com, look at their 990, and look at how much their operating budget is compared to their capital debt. And if that in too many schools, that's a 1-to-1 ratio. And if that's a 1-to-1 ratio, I'd be really careful because there's trouble on the horizon. That needs to be about a 50% ratio at tops. And it's a real easy way to understand what's going on beyond the surface in the life of especially of a small college.
I really appreciate you saying that. We've talked in the past about different ways to assess, is a college financially healthy? And there's, Hechinger Report and some others have some numbers they've run out there, and there's some different websites. And of course, you've got the Moody's rankings and things, but that's a really simple, straightforward one that we haven't talked about on the podcast before. We've talked about 990s before, but I really like it. So can you just restate that again in case anybody missed it?
It really is, because every time I look at a school, that's the first thing I do is I go and look at their 990, and I look at their operating budget, which will be toward the top of their total revenues. Don't look at their appreciated assets. That's a fuzzy number. That kind of depends. I mean, if your campus is in a great location where you could resell it for a lot of money, your appreciated assets are high. If it's not, they're low. So that's not a good number. Look at their operating budget, how much they spent to operate through the year, and then look at their total capital debt. And that's a number which will be about 2 or 3 pages down from that. And you compare those two numbers, and if that's close to 1-to-1, I'd be really, really careful. Now, state universities won't show that in the same way because they have bonding, they have other kinds of things that goes on that kind of fuzzies those numbers up. But for private institutions, that's a real good way to understand where they are. And it'll also tell you if a president, if that's gone up dramatically lately, that means they're making investments, which may be good for the current student enrollment. From a college president side, I look at it and say, is a president running up the debt before they leave? And sometimes that happens as well. So it is but it's I think we'll get to the heart. And then the other number to look at is, are they running a surplus or a deficit? And that's on that first page that you'll see under the revenue and expenses. Just the bottom line is a rent, a surplus, or a deficit. Now, right now, most schools, thankfully we are not, we're in really good shape, but most schools are running deficits because of COVID. And if those are a 2% deficit, that's manageable. If that's a 5 or 10% deficit, you need to be really careful because somebody's going to have to pay for it at some point in the journey. So those are a couple of benchmarks to use that I find really helpful to understand the financial health of an institution.
Now, what about enrollment trends? Is that a good one, or do you feel that, the enrollment trend should be reflected in the, in the budget, and you should see it there because maybe you're having to discount so much to bring students in, so enrollment is not as good of an indicator as the ones you've shared?
Yeah, I don't think enrollment trends are an indicator at all. As I've told my board, I'll make your enrollment whatever you want it to be. And, if we give it away, we can fill everything up many times over.
Right.
Or we can find one student who's willing to pay us $50 million a year, and, we're fine. Right. I don't think enrollment trends show, especially with the private schools and even publics now, because publics are discounting at a pretty heavy rate as well for their upper end students. The regular students are not getting that discount, but their upper end students are getting a lot of free rides. So, yeah, I would not look at enrollment trend as a predictor of health.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on endowment for private schools?
Again, I'm not a huge fan of endowment as a predictor of financial health. The schools who have been in most trouble the last 7 or 8 years pre-COVID are the schools with big endowments because the endowment cannot keep pace with all of the expenses they have. And but the endowments lock them in. So if they have an endowment for, a literature teacher who teaches pre-Civil War from a certain perspective, it may be great to have that position. But if there are only 6 students in that class and they're taking up a full faculty load for that one position and they can't get rid of it because they're endowed for it, it really doesn't add to the health of the institution. So I'm finding that schools who had kind of what I would call kind of mid-level endowments, which is probably 6, 7, 8 times their operating budget, they're struggling. Now, the ones with the bigger endowments, that's a different world, and that's
right,
a great
like
world.
the Princetons and whatever.
Yeah, Princeton's and in the Christian college arena, the Wheatons and schools like that. But endowment really is not a sign of health. For my institution, we run a lot of online programs, and our online programs help us to provide a very robust experience for our traditional undergraduates on campus, because those are financially work out very well for the institution. So we can underwrite the costs of what we're doing for traditional undergraduates because of that. As I always tell our online recruiting staff, I said, the traditional campus gives you the reputation to recruit online, and you give money back to the traditional campus. That's how this works. And it works pretty well. And still, we can be incredibly affordable in our online programs and still provide a very robust financial support for an undergraduate program that most schools can't do. So it's kind of a living endowment for us.
No, and I was going to ask you about that, because I've seen you've got even several do you call them satellite campuses, or?
We don't have those anymore. That model has just kind of, we ran that for 25 years, did very well with it. We had campuses across the Southeast, but online has grown so well, and we can do so many robust things through online. We can provide a great degree online. We don't have to have the locations, and people like that convenience. So I think it's just a change in market trends, and most schools have moved away from those satellite campuses at this point. But, we've got 20 plus master's programs, a couple of doctorates online, number of undergraduate programs online. But again, most of us think about the traditional student on campus every day who's part of that campus life, and those are all different the ways to deliver education.
No, but I wanted to ask you about the online. Do you feel that most schools could make online education a big component of, well, maybe big is not the right word, but a fiscally sound component of what they're doing with some good strategy? Or do you feel that, there'd be too much saturation of the market out there, and there's going to be sort of, for lack of a better word, winners and losers? There's always going to be winners and losers because some are going to execute better than others. But do you feel that that's something that most schools could do? They could replicate a good online program and reach the non-traditional student if they just implemented a good strategy?
They might. I think a lot of schools cannot. And the reason they cannot is their faculty have not embraced it. And, you have to love an online student as much as you love one that you see walking across campus, headed to lunch. And if you don't, you can't serve them. And schools are seeing them, online students, as a financial resource rather than as a student with real issues, real challenges. When I have graduation, we have our online students, I love seeing them come across the platform. And, they got huge families who are thrilled for them. A lot of single moms are going to school and getting a degree. A lot of parents will tell me, I did this because I wanted my kids to be proud of me, or for job advancement, whatever. But you've got to really embrace that. And most schools have not gotten to that point. They still, again, this unwillingness to change. They're stuck in a model of the past. The only way you can learn is if you sit in front of me 3 times a week for an hour, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I lecture to you. That's the only way to properly learn. Well, no. There are lots of ways to learn. And so online, you just have to teach in different ways to help people to learn. But I find it very demanding and very rigorous education if it's done right. But most schools won't put the investment in doing it right. And for us, we put a lot of investment, millions of dollars of investment to make sure it's done right. And if schools will do that, I don't think there's a market saturation. What I am worried about is the for-profits have taken so much of that market, and they are not committed to helping those students succeed. They're committed to trying to get as much government money out of them as they can, and that's just shameful. We can do better than that, and so that's part of why we got into the online world.
That's great. I really, really appreciate you making that distinction between people being motivated for money versus really helping students. And if you're not serving students, ultimately it's not going to work. And I think that resonates with my experience too. I mean, that's going to be tough to change. Probably professors that didn't come in to their teaching role expecting to teach in that capacity. Yeah,
exactly. And teaching online is very different. But it's if faculty could ever see those students and look them in the eye and see what's going on in their family, they would say, "What can I do to help?" And they'd find a way. But and that's kind of where our faculty come. They're very gracious. They're very kind. Of course, we're Christian institutions, so they feel a great calling to it. So it's been great for us. We even have a online program in China. We have 500 MBA students studying in China, and we teach in Mandarin for them. So it's been a lot of fun to branch out to the whole world through online.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, every year, the most common profession I work with are students that want to be doctors. And so I wanted to give you a recommended resource for future doctors to answer all your questions about medical school specialties, etc. And the resource I'm recommending is a YouTube channel, and it's just MED, Scool Insiders. Now, this YouTube channel has over 1.44 million subscribers, including me. They have over 300 videos, and they use like cartoon animation, so they're really interesting. The other day, I just could not stop watching their videos. I had a lot of work to do, but they're fascinating. For example, if you want to know which medical specialties have the highest satisfaction rate, they have a video. If you want to know which specialties have the highest pay, they have a video. If you want to know which has the lowest pay, they have a video. If you want to know which are the hardest to get into, they have a video. And it just goes on and on and on. Now, this is a medical school consulting company, so at the end of the videos, they are going to put a plug in. They've worked with over 1 million students, which is incredible. And they have over 100 doctors who do the consulting in their area of specialty. But their videos are fantastic. If you're curious about medical school or you're interested in medical school, check out the YouTube channel, Scool Insiders. We'll now return to my interview with Roger Parrott. I want to go back to something you said earlier, Roger, toward the start of our interview, where you were giving your 4 S's. I believe one of them was status. And I know that a lot of times institutions feel a pressure to appear in a certain place in the rankings, or to present their institutions as being selective so that the public will feel value is conferred on the degree, and maybe it's even about yielding students against competitors. How much do your fellow presidents feel the pressure to sort of increase the stature of their institutions in order to attract students, because the public seems to put a certain emphasis on that when they evaluate schools?
Yeah, a great question, because the pressure comes from boards. Boards want that status, and so those rankings become very important to boards of trustees, which then that means they become important to presidents, and then it moves. I think it's important for boards, for families, to understand what's going on behind those rankings. Those rankings, especially U.S. News, is designed for schools primarily in the Northeast, out of which the newest U.S. News people came, in that kind of program to lift up that kind of program with a big endowment, with a lot of giving from alumni, and a big alumni support base, with faculty who's reached certain ranks, etc., with retention, because they only take in the very best of the best, and so nobody ever drops out. Those kinds of things, and the rest of us are not going to fit into those rankings. I mean, especially a school like ours, which has serving a lot of students who may come from a background maybe more rural, maybe not as experienced, so we have a broad range of students in our traditional, our online we talked about. That's not going to hit in the rankings, but in the rankings to me that matter the most, one of the most affordable schools in America, that one's important to me. A school of character, that ranking that we have is important to me. There are rankings for us that have become a lot more important than essentially, what U.S. News ranks you in a certain order. Now, we get those rankings, and, we're ranked high in social mobility, and we're ranked high as best value and undergraduate teaching and some of this stuff. But, just who's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a section doesn't tell you the value of the school. It tells you that they put priorities on the things that do push those rankings up. We all know how to move those rankings. When we look at the characteristics and the amount of the score that goes towards certain things. And
Sure.
Everybody knows how to manipulate that as much as you want to, if that's a priority. To us, it's not a priority. I find that.
But how much pressure do you feel other presidents are feeling as you interact with them because, the board wants this, that, the other, and so therefore, we need to study the rankings and make decisions and sort of let that, drive the ship? Like, do you feel that's widespread and rampant out there in higher ed because the boards? Yeah, talk to me about that.
And I think the boards are pressuring these schools to do it, and the boards will know some high-end students who want to come there, and those families will be real interested in the rankings, and I understand why they are, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's not an evil thing. It just is what it is. It's just a skewed ranking. It's not an accurate picture of the institution, and so what I get concerned with is then they start to allocate resources on things that drive the rankings rather than allocating resources on what's best for the student. The bottom line decision of every college administrator should be what's best for the student. And if those two intersect, and a lot of times they do intersect, then that's great. But when they don't intersect, we need to be careful about that. And what's really driving us? Is our status more important than a student getting the best experience they could get? And we have a responsibility. We are not responsible just to boards and responsible to rankings and public stature. We are responsible to people who are trusted their lives for our future, their future in us. And if we don't care for them, if we don't invest in them, if we don't put them as a first priority, we don't have any business being in this business. We ought to get out.
Oh, thank you. Well said. One other question: you hear a lot about sometimes referred to as the demographic cliff, sometimes referred to as the birth dearth. And how much do you hear that concern that the population is drying up because less people are being born, or certain areas are experiencing outmigration, and we're just not seeing the applicant flow because of demographic trends? Is that something at all that presidents discuss?
I think they discuss it, but in my world of smaller colleges, we're 1,000, 1,200 traditional students. We're about 4,000 or 5,000 overall. In our world of smaller colleges, it doesn't make any difference. There are more enough people in the country for schools like ours. I always believe more education is better than less. And so, yeah, there may not be as many 18-year-olds ready to go, but there are a lot more 30 and 40-year-olds who dropped out who need to come back and finish, and we want to help them do that or get a master's degree. Master's degrees become the standard. It's not an undergraduate degree anymore. You got to have a master's degree at least in order to compete in whatever field you're going into. And so there are lots of other ways we can do education other than just simply the number of 18-year-olds. And yeah, for some big Ohio State or Miami-Dade Community College where the numbers are gigantic, yeah, those trends impact them, not for smaller schools.
Mm-hmm. Last question for you, Roger, and then we'll transition to Belhaven. Our audience is mostly parents. What are the things you feel parents should be looking for when they're, evaluating a school for their kids that oftentimes maybe doesn't get as much attention as you feel it should?
Yeah. Boy, so important. First and foremost, I'd say be engaged in the decision. Now, if parents are listening to this podcast, clearly they're engaged in the decision. But I don't think there's anything that frustrates me more than a parent who says, my son, daughter is 18 now. They got to make their own decision about college. Like, are you kidding me? Your whole life, you've been trying to shape every decision they ever made, and now they're going to make the most important decision of your life, and you're just going to cut them free and let them do it? No, be engaged in the decision. Yes, they got to own it. They got to believe in it. They've got to be committed to it, but make it a family decision, because I tell you, once you drop them off at college, you're not done as a parent. You're not. And if you are, you're not doing it right, or the school's not doing it right. I mean, I know schools who will tell parents, they're not your responsibility anymore. You drop them off, stay out of it. We don't want you engaged. I don't say that. At orientation, I always tell parents, I said, we love helicopter parents. Just don't be an attack helicopter. Just be a hovering helicopter. And we're good with that. But we want parents involved. But, I think there are a couple things. One is I already mentioned the question, ask, when you're taking a campus tour, ask, are these kind of people I'd like to be like? But the criteria I give families to look past all the view books, all the material, all the regular stuff that they get. I mean, all that stuff makes us all look really good. All those view books, you could almost interchange the names. You're really important to us. You're not a number. We're going to give you the best experience ever. They all got a picture of a student sitting by a lake playing a guitar, and a lot of those schools don't even have a lake. We at least have a lake, and we have a guitar, and we stage the same picture. So, but I tell families, here's how to get past that. Ask, what do you require of everybody? College students are very busy, and so you can't require a lot of everybody, because every department has demands. Sports, arts, they all have demands. So what you require of everybody really matters, and I'd ask that question, and in that you can understand the values the institution has, and if they don't require anything of everybody, it tells you they don't have a value base, and I'd be extra careful on that. So I would encourage that. Another one is I'd encourage families to look at the real cost of higher education. Obviously, don't look at the sticker price. The sticker doesn't matter to anybody. Nobody pays a sticker at any school. So, I shouldn't say any school, at least any private school. So ignore the sticker price, but also don't get enamored by the size of your scholarship. It's not the size of your scholarship that matters. It's the difference between the tuition and the scholarship, what you're going to have to pay. So somebody may say, I got a $30,000 scholarship to such a school. They got a $50,000 tuition. You're going to have to pay $20,000. Well, you come to Belhaven, we got $27,000 tuition. You're probably going to get maybe a $17,000 scholarship. You're going to pay $10,000. Well, you're bragging on the $30,000 scholarship, but it's less expensive, and you got a better scholarship percentage-wise with us. And people don't understand that. And then look at the cost of how beyond just the tuition, but look at the room and board. Some of these schools, especially the publics, They keep the tuition low on purpose because the legislatures don't like them raising tuition. So they load it up in fees, they load it up in room and board, they load it up with other kinds of costs. So you got to look at all of that, and then look at when can you graduate? I mean, the average to get through a public institution is 5.5 to 6 years. So if you're going to go to school for an extra year and a half, and you could go to a different school and be done in 4 and have that all guaranteed. I mean, look at the numbers. Look at the amount of money you're paying extra to go to school, plus the income you're losing. And the last thing I'd say is, and maybe it's just my bias of being in this business for a long time as a college president, but I would talk to the college president if I was looking at a school. And wow. I really would. And or somebody who's at least high up in the administration. As a parent, you ought to talk to somebody who's responsible for the well-being of your son or daughter. And, when prospective students come to our campus, I give them my home phone number. I tell them, call me whenever. And I tell them I wouldn't send my kids to a school where I couldn't get in touch with the president. If there's something that I need and I can't get anybody else to satisfy it, I want the person in charge. And so don't be afraid. Don't feel like you're just stuck with the admissions office when you make these campus tours. You talk to who you want to talk to and tell them who you want to talk to. And if they're trying to protect you from them, that probably tells you something too.
No, that's great.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Now, I know Illinois is an expensive state to go in-state.
Mm-hmm.
Is it got a similar cost structure to UIUC? And I say expensive. Obviously, it's different than the privates, but when it's going to cost you about $40,000 to live on campus and play in-state, it makes it one of the pricier states in the country to be an in-state resident.
Right.
Is it similar cost structure, or what's the pricing?
It's a little bit cheaper.
Okay.
I think the in-state tuition is around $15,000 a year, and then you're looking at about $13,000 for room and board if you're going to be living on campus.
Yeah.
So it's a little under 30. So it's maybe 25% cheaper.
That's pretty reasonable. I mean, there's a lot of states that are at that price point.
Right. Out of state, it's $30,000 for the tuition, and then the same living cost. So you're looking at $44,000, $45,000.
I'm actually surprised that the room and board is $13,000 because I find city schools tend to be, north of $15,000 now, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, sometimes it depends on the meal plan and the dorm.
Right, right. I mean, I'm sure they probably quote this is the dorm room where you live in the closet with 6 people in the back. I don't know. And, I wanted to just add something about the admission is that a lot of the ways that people come to UIC is through the community college system. They have one of the great things about Illinois, I think, is their community college system. And they usually have fantastic articulation agreements with the state universities. So you can take, for instance, I live near the College of Lake County. You could take your whole first 2 years there and they tell you exactly what you need to do to transfer. And then you go and you just get your degree from UIC. And so that's another pathway that people take to go there.
That's great. That's great. Friends, we're going to be having an interview with Steve Robinson, who's a president of a community college. It's coming up in the next 5-6 weeks. And I think that's going to be good to learn. It can open up people's eyes to things about community colleges that maybe people hadn't thought, or stereotypes that they had that he debunks.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that because I think that, for so many students, community college makes a lot of sense. Let's say they're not quite, they're not quite sure about school. Maybe, high school didn't go so great. They're not sure what they want to do. Maybe they need to stay at home for another year. But you can get a great education and then they will help you get to a 4-year college. And many times those 4-year colleges will give successful community college students merit scholarships. And, it's a very viable path to an education, I think.
Well, we also have an article coming up. I think it's like 224 or 225. It's not just really soon. And it's talking about how Amherst College is now a leader at recruiting community college students. And it's literally almost, in some cases, almost becoming a hook. Like,
right.
There's sometimes one of the things that some schools look at when they're evaluating students is, can we play a transformative role in the life of this person? And so if someone's looking at a transfer student from another very well-resourced residential affluent school versus a community college kid, a lot of times the school would be like, we can make more of a difference in this person's life.
Right.
Yeah. What about programs? Are there any programs besides Homeland Security and in the health profession that stand out? Because it seems like it's very dominated by health profession a lot.
Yeah. 25% of the student population is in either, is in STEM, and that's most likely going to be a health sciences. But they do have a large psychology program, and they have a large business and accounting program. And I think those programs are pretty well respected. And again, you're thinking about that alumni network that is in Chicago. If you want to stay in Chicago, probably you're going to know an alumni almost anywhere that you apply for a job or an internship. And like I mentioned, they do have criminal justice and the Homeland Security are also specialties.
Mm-hmm.
of UIC.
You know, that point you made a second ago, Lisa, it's really important. Like, schools have regional networks.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, for example, you would have a much better network in Georgia, being a University of Georgia grad, than you would from some other schools that, you know, are super, super, super famous. Just because there's not that many of them. And Penn State, if you're in Pennsylvania and you're part of that Penn State network, that's like a really strong network. Pretty much any flagship school has an incredible job network in that state, and usually also in the border states, and oftentimes even in the region. And so that's something that I feel people don't think about sometimes when they look at schools, is like where you're going to. Now, you don't always know where you're going to live, but
right.
It's just something to think about. Like, if you know that you would like to be in Chicago, everybody's going to know the school, right? Employers, and it's probably going to be a really strong alumni network, and it's just something to think about that I don't think people think about that much.
No, I think like the University of Missouri Columbia is like that. They
Correct.
have a very enthusiastic alumni network in St. Louis, and if you want to work there, I mean, it's almost you probably might have more of a shot at it than you went to Harvard, because you know, they really appreciate Mizzou graduates if they're Mizzou alumni. So, yeah, it's just something to always think about.
Yeah. Well, and just a good chance that someone you're going to interview with or whatever is a grad. And then,
exactly.
And all of that. Yeah. Do you want to share the diversity numbers? I mentioned it was very racially diverse. Do you have that?
Sure, I do. But I did want to mention one more program, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And I alluded to it first, and that's their honors college. So they have an honors college. It kind of is one of those programs where they offer a lot of smaller classes in lieu of the larger classes. There's a lot more advising. They do a 2-semester long research project capstone, which is, you know, research is very active at the University of Illinois Chicago. And so especially in the honors college, you get to be in the quiet dorm. They have they say that their average student who goes to the honor college graduates in 85% of them graduate in 4 years, as opposed to the rest of the school. And they do very well throughout that. So in terms of the diversity, it's 21% Asian. Black is 7%. I kind of thought that would be higher given the makeup of the city. Hispanic is 35%. International, 7%. White is 24%. So you have like a pretty diverse, I wouldn't say any one group.
That sounds like California.
Yeah, a particularly high.
Sizable Asian and Latinx numbers. I'm surprised Hispanic is 35. Do you have a theory on why that's so high?
Well, I think that, you know, it is close to some of the Hispanic neighborhoods that are on the near south side.
Sure.
And I think that they really do a good job of trying to recruit students. Like, they really try to get those first generation low income students. And so, you know, I think that it's probably like a combination of like that plus their location.
Yeah, and I know some people aren't going to like this because it doesn't seem like I'm stereotyping, but it's been my experience that a lot of times when schools have strong health sciences programs, the Asian student numbers tend to be pretty sizable. So I wasn't surprised by that. And then also Chicago's a diverse city too.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. Awesome. Any final things you want to leave us with, Lisa?
Well, I know you like to talk about sports. So
I know a little bit about their sports. They're switching conferences.
Yeah, they're in the Horizon League now. Are they moving that?
Yeah, well, they're in Horizon, but they're moving to Missouri Valley.
Oh, wow.
So that's 2022. So that's a little bit I know about them as a sports angle, but that's Division I, both of them.
Right. And they're called the Chicago Flames. Why do you think they're called the Chicago Flames? What are they named after?
Ice hockey?
It's the Chicago Fire.
Oh, that one went over my head. I should have known that.
They're the Flames. How is ice hockey the Flames?
I don't know.
Anyway, But, I'm sorry, folks, you're not going to get to go to football games if you go to UIC because there aren't any. But basketball is very popular. Baseball is very popular. They do have a lot of sports and a lot of participation in sports. The other thing I just wanted to say that the admissions office always really says apply early action. You're going to have a better shot of getting in and more chances at merit money and financial aid if you apply early action. And if you want to apply to the honors programs, any kind of scholarships, or the GPPA programs, you can only do it through early action. So just keep that deadline in mind.
Yeah, and that's true for everybody listening, for every school. So there was a time when I used to say there's 2 times not to apply early action. If you literally just learn about a school before the deadline and you can't put a good application together, or if you're coming off of not the best semester, and you're not really able to show good grade trajectory. Now there's been such a more of a focus on these priority deadlines and early action that I'm in between in the middle when someone's coming off of not the greatest semester. I'm almost inclined to still say apply early action because what's often likely to happen is that you're deferred, and they still took note that you applied early action. And so now the only time I really tell people not to apply early action is if they can't get a good application together. Now, there are certain schools, that don't have any differential admission rates at all between their early action and their regular. And that's also, that's a little bit of an exception as well. And the University of Georgia is an outlier. Sometimes applying EA, early action, can actually hurt you. Then, of course, there's the single choice and the restrictive early actions, and that's a whole different world there. But that's such a short list, and I'm not talking about the single choice early action schools or the restrictive early action schools. Good stuff, Lisa. Anything else?
I think, like I said, if you're, interested in urban situation, you're interested in some of the things that they're good at, maybe a health sciences program, or you really want to work for the Department of Homeland Security, because who does not? This could be an excellent option for you, as long as you're okay with the fact that there's not going to be a bunch of frat houses on campus. There's not going to be like a lot of people living on campus. But if you're willing to embrace the community, embrace the city as a whole, I think you could be very happy there.
No, you've definitely whet my appetite for this school. I can't wait to visit. Chicago's a place I do get to, so this would be an easy one for me to get to and visit. And you've said a number of things that have made me feel like this is a school I need to be recommending, and I want to go do more of my own research now. And that Homeland Security is definitely one. And then I love all of those accelerated programs that they have.
Right.
Someone that wants to do an accelerated program and likes the idea of being in a big city, that's a pretty large number of people I work with. So I'm kind of looking back and feeling like, geez, I should have been probably putting this on some people's lists. But that's one thing about this job that keeps it interesting. Like, there's so many schools out there. To get to know them all and master them, you kind of never do that, no matter how long you live and no matter how much you study.
No, and I think this school, it's just a great example of how, maybe it's not in the top 20 of the ratings, but for certain programs, you can't do any better.
Yeah.
And I mean, working at the hospitals at Rush and at Cook County, I mean, you are going to get all kinds of experience as, whatever kind of biology or medical or nursing student you are, you're going to get amazing clinicals. And so I think, it's just something to look past the ratings and really look at the content of what schools are offering and see if that's a good fit for you.
And I'm very biased towards schools that are very diverse, like socioeconomically and racially, because I just think people learn from people who are different from them. And I love that. I love that. I'm sure they probably have a decent amount of international diversity too, because schools like this, people know, wow, this is a place where I could be a doctor, I could be a dentist, I could do occupational therapy. I can put me on that path to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you come across any numbers on international diversity?
Yeah, it's 7% of their students are international. I think, this might have been, this was fall 2021. So that might be a suppressed number, I would think.
Sure. People had some visa issues. But even still, like 38,000 students, like that's 2,800, right? Like you don't only look at the percentage, you have to look at the critical mass too. So that still results in I'm sure they list a lot of different countries represented amongst that almost 2,800 international students.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, you whet my appetite, Lisa. Thank you.
All right, my pleasure.
Next week in the news, how Amherst College became a champion for community college transfer students. A great article by Yasmin Padilla from Inside Higher Ed. Our question from a listener is, question about hooks for the podcast. Do schools view leadership as a hook? My daughter is a participant in a regional youth leadership program that is selective and well regarded. She will have 3 years of escalating experience in leadership activities by the time she graduates. We are not aiming for an exclusive school, but rather are hoping for significant merit aid. That question comes to us from Bobby from Ohio. Our interview is with Roger Parrott, the president of Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi, in Understanding Belhaven University. And our college spotlight will be Roger Parrott's interview about Belhaven University. Also, next week, we will have a special 13-minute recommended resource about a new book and a new podcast about college admissions by Tim Fields of Emory University and Shareem Herndon Brown, and college counselor.
Yeah, friends, I normally don't go 13 minutes on a recommended resource, but these are people I've known for some time. Shareem was just leaving West Town when I was transitioning in, and Tim has been great to me over at Emory, working with him on a number of initiatives. And when they got together and teamed up to do a book and a podcast, I really wanted to support them. Look forward to that next week. But in the meantime, as you go about your business throughout the week, I want you to remember that college is not a prize to be won, but it's a match to be made. And
Amen.
It's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. See you next week, friends.
See you next week, everybody.
Same bat time, same bat channel. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. And you can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.